is the lack of integration between the journalism schools on the one hand and the media that they allegedly train people for on the other. In my previous existences, and working with other industries, there would be a constant dialogue, whether it's business or NGOs or international affairs, Charlene, that you know so much about. There was a constant dialogue. There seems to be a fence, which I don't quite understand, between the journalism and communication schools on the one hand and the practitioners of the craft on the other. And it seems to me that in the modern era, we don't have that luxury. And this is an issue that we academics have to do a better job of, and we journalists and writers have to do a better job of kind of creating a dialogue, which leads to my segue for questions from the audience about dialogue. So if our colleagues at on the technical side of things could queue up the questions from Second Life for our panel, I would greatly appreciate it. Roll the tape, as they used to say.
Good afternoon. My name is Gbemi Olujobi. I am a journalist and graduate student from Nigeria. I was pleased to be invited by Dean Wilson to ask a question of this distinguished panel. My question is for Charlene Hunter-Gold. MS Hunter-Gold, it is so important that we learn how to leverage media to inform and serve people across a broad range of cultures. You are admired for your work covering Africa. Could you describe what it took to report critical news and leverage the power of the media in a culture and continent different from your own? Secondly, how has telling the story of South Africa under apartheid been different from telling it now? Thank you very much. I look forward to your response.
Well, thank you very much for the question.
That was very spontaneous, of course.
Yes, I can see. Well, I think to a certain extent, I've already answered your first question. I tried to go into Africa with the admonition of that Black Panther in the back of my head, coming in right. And I have learned so much. I mean, I thought that I knew a lot when I went to Africa, but I have learned so much by listening to the people, by going to the people. And one of my little sort of Jesse Jackson type phrases is that you have to go there to know there. And you really do have to be in an environment and open to the people. We have in journalism, I'm sure, Alex, you had this probably in the places you were stationed, fixers. These are local people who know the terrain often better than you do, especially if you're new to the area. And they are sort of your eyes and ears into places, people, things, cups of coffee, sources, whatever. And a lot of times these are local journalists. And many times they're journalists who work for government media and know how constrained they are by the government media, and they're eager to help an international journalist get out the word. So that's been, just being open and trying to come in right has been a critical dimension to my work in understanding not a country, but a continent of 900 million people in 53 or 54 countries, depending on your politics. How has it been different telling the story about South Africa from the time of apartheid to now? Briefly, you know, part of my fascination, as I think most Americans, with South Africa has to do with the relationship of apartheid to Jim Crow and the evolution of our struggle in America and the evolution of the struggle out of apartheid in South Africa. So for me, it's been like a laboratory and almost deja vu all over again, although that they diverge in some key areas, not least being that there is a black majority in power as opposed to what happened here in the States. And so the question still remains whether or not a black majority can deliver for the people who've been oppressed for so long and now are looking for a democracy dividend, or will it make that much difference? And I think that that's a question that needs a lot more time to answer, but basically it's been a very exciting, amazing place to be in, and a good one to observe the rest of the continent from.
Thank you. Could we roll the second question, please, which I think is coming in from faraway Brazil?
Hello, my name is Gilson Schwartz. I'm an academic based in Brazil. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to ask a question of this distinguished panel. My question is for Josh Marshall. Hi, Josh. My country has very high rates of economic and social inequality. However, online connectivity in Brazil is the highest in Latin America. What advice could you share about harnessing the power of online communication to help bridge these great inequities? Have voice to the voiceless. Thank you.
Well, you know, the digital divide question, whether it's in the U.S. or internationally, is kind of beyond my competence in terms of how to solve it beyond some elementary but incredibly difficult ways. But I guess the best way I could answer that question would be to say, you know, all kinds of technological utopias are based on this idea that a new technology will make the powerful no longer be powerful. And a lot of the talk about the way the internet is going to revolutionize politics or media in this country all come down to the powerful will no longer be powerful. The people who can, you know, who can move great amounts of capital and have big publications, that won't be able to hold their ground vis-a-vis, you know, people self-publishing. I would say, though, that I'm a foundationalist about the technology, at least to a small degree. And, you know, in history, there's different points where, you know, like military technology has given an advantage, small advantage to defenders as opposed to attackers. You think about like the way that artillery, you know, basically did away with the castle, and that moves the balance of power a little. And I would say that the internet technologies we have right now are so widely distributed. You know, it's one thing to be able, sure, everybody can talk, but not everybody can find an audience to listen to them. But I think that that wide distribution of platforms to communicate and the ability to build audiences has given some small advantage back to fact vis-a-vis propaganda. Not much, but some. And even that some is significant. It's also created a much more frictionless environment for organizing. You know, a lot of the online organizing, and again, I think this can be in a domestic context or an international context. A lot of it that I've seen is not organizing, but also distribution of information. In its mechanics, in hypothetical terms, it's not that different from what Walter Lippmann was talking about 100 years ago. The key is, though, that the relative lack of friction, the ability to communicate more quickly, to pull together groups of people more quickly, that these make a very real difference. So the best answer I can give to that question is, that is the answer. I think that these new technologies, even though they have already been put to the use of big corporations and governments and all the sort of the incumbent power holders, does give some advantage back to small voices of fact that can start to push back against those forces.
Thank you for that answer. We now go from Second Life back to First Life.
First Life. We're first. We're still first for the time being. And I know we're getting close to the end. I went through the many questions, and I've decided I'm going to ask you two very specific questions that came up. They are highly specific to the craft of journalism. And then I'm going to ask you two general questions, which I think will work well to close up, and which I must say I think reflect a sense of frustration, perhaps, that I think emanates from this conversation. People are reaching for solutions. People are reaching for things to do, but they, based on the responses I'm getting from the audience, are not quite wrapping their heads around what actually can be done. But let me just say two highly specific questions, and here's one.